that's the difference, right? Between you making a choice driven by your own strength or your own selfish will versus you making a decision that is really backed by, God's truth, universal truth, or soundness when it comes to something. And I think in life, we have many opportunities where the truth is presented to us, and whether we desire to take it in or not, or we'll just decide to do it in the way that we construct in ourselves that it's the best way to do
You'll
it.
be my forever friend. This love will never end. No, nothing can come between them.
If you have any stories that you wish to share, you don't have to, but you can tell me any kind of impactful, either whether it's a quote you heard, whether it's a statement that your father or a male father figure, right, either has told you, or if it's an experience that you had with them. That's the question for tonight. What is it? What are the things that really stood out to you from people who are in your life, that if they're not your biological father, maybe they stepped up to be a fatherly figure to you. So that's the question for tonight. And I know that today is not easy for many of those who might have lost their fathers, like me, who fathers might not be in their life. Maybe you have an estranged relationship with your father, distant one. It's not easy, right? It's not easy, but my prayer is that you would be the type of individual, or at least be able to have the opportunity that was given to me, someone who lost their father at a very young age, um, to be able to put God's, presence in His Spirit and let Him be the ultimate father figure, right? Because God is the father of all fathers, And I think in my head, one of those, I guess that would be the quote. And just to kind of segue into answering the question that I posed to you guys while I'm waiting to see if someone else answers, that is the quote that stands out to me. And that is the quote that kind of offered me, freedom, really, in my mind and my being and in my heart, to be able to understand that my father, even though he can't physically be here, God is the father of all fathers. So I can tap into, uh, whether you want to call it the masculine presence, the masculine authority, that I would prayerfully would have hoped would have come down the pipeline of my father to me, and be able to gain that through my relationship with God. And I think for me, once I realized that, then I realized that God can put anybody, right, any male presence who He felt would reflect His character to me, and they would be able to offer some things that, because due to my father passing away, not being able to give me some of those things that I would be, that I was missing. And so because of that, I could be able to identify all of the other angels that God presented, to me. So I pray that if you haven't experienced that yet, if you haven't experienced someone who you feel is someone who is a godly father figure to you, or a male presence in your life that you can glean from, that can impact your life positively, that I pray from this moment on that you'll be able to, one, have your eyes open, four, to be able to identify that person and be able to take the opportunity when it presents itself. And I pray that God bring those people in your life, so that you can feel their presence, and their presence can offer you, um, I guess, a fatherly essence or presence in your life. And so that I think that's one of the quotes that really, really stood out to me. Like I said, that helped me to not necessarily be so attached to wanting my father to physically be here, to be able to, develop me, cultivate me, let me learn about men and things like that. And I think also certain examples that are coming to my mind. There was uh, a wonderful father figure for me. He basically was a older man. We used to call him Brother Acreage. My grandmother would send my sister and I to like a little small Caribbean church. Very small Caribbean church. It was like a storefront church. If anybody ever heard of that, it wasn't like a mega church. Didn't have their own building. They do now, but they didn't at the time for many years. And oftentimes the church would just be held like literally in a small section in another building that they would rent out. And there was a gentleman called Brother Akers. So my grandmother would send us, but she wouldn't go. And the memory that is coming to me now that is really impactful that I want to share with you guys, that I really now have so much more honor for, because the church literally, I could walk there probably walking from my household. It was literally like around the corner, guys. Like literally I could come out of I lived in uh I don't know, like a complex of houses. And basically, if you came out the house, you literally walk down the road and you'd make like a left, and the church was right there. Right. So, sometimes my sister and I would walk. And I remember as we started going to the church, he was like an elder in the church, and his name was Brother Acreage, and he would start picking us up. He would start picking us up to go to the church in his car. And I remember sometimes I would think like, why? Like, why is he coming to pick us up? It's like literally like maybe 3 to 5 minute walk, if that, to go there. But it would probably take him longer, right, to drive to my house, because there was like a light in between. And I didn't know where he would have to come from to travel to the church. So I'm assuming maybe he would even have to come further than where I lived, but he would literally come from his house and then pick us up and like religiously and consistently take us to church. And in my mind, it just blew me. And I remember it blew my mind. Every time he picked us up, what I would look forward to, he'd have all like these mints. Like the little peppermints that are in the clear paper. And he'd give it to us. And that was like, a little highlight of little candy for the day. And he would literally, take us back home. And now that I'm older, and God bless his soul, he's passed on. But I realize that him wanting to pick us up every time to make sure that we were going to church was, one, he wanted to encourage and keep us motivated to continue to keep going to church, right? That was number one. And then two, I realized that when he would come and pick us up, that was his way of protecting us, right? Me in my simple mind back then, as a child, and you would think I would know, because I did experience some things, unfortunately, at a young age that children really shouldn't experience, meaning knowing that there are predators around. But I guess I didn't think of it in that way, because thankfully my grandmother stepped in to raise us and take care of us. And I felt like the neighborhood and the community that she brought us in was a good community, right? I didn't feel, at least at that age, what do I know as a child, but in my feeling, in the energy, and probably it was in comparison from things that I had already experienced. So it was very light compared to that. So my guard wasn't as up in that community. But for him, I think he understood that two young girls who don't have their father, right? Because both my sister and I didn't grow up with our fathers. And on top of that, we don't have also our mother and our grandmother, even though me and my little self, because she was so strong, I didn't know that she was taking us in, and she was literally in her elderly age, right? She was in her 50s taking care of us, taking care of us. And so he knew that we needed protection. He knew that these two young girls, even though they're walking from their home and it's a like 3 minute, 5 minute walk, anything can happen in between that walk, right? And so now that I'm older, I really honor it so much, because he would do it consistently. And that was his way of not only providing support for my grandmother, providing support and protection for us, but he understood, and he didn't feel like it was going out of his way or would take anything from him to protect us in that way. So now me being, older, I honor that. I really honor that. And it reminds me of the quote, one of the quotes that I put out to you guys today, that Sigmund Freud said that there is no stronger need, right, than a father's protection of a child. And so that's one of my probably most memorable um, experiences of a father figure in my life. Unfortunately, in culture right now, people not honoring women taking on traditional roles in the household. I also think it's the same on the other end, where mm, traditional masculinity in men is being demonized right now. And it's I don't think that's a good recipe for anything. When we demonize certain positioning and infrastructure of relationships and marriage, I think it throws everything off of alignment. For me, this is my space that I can, choose to engage with you guys and present topics that I feel are important, not just to myself, but all around. And so I really wanted to take space and time to honor the fathers. All right, so let's get into the scenario, folks. I really want to know your thoughts on this one. All right, so tonight's scenario is basically there is a married couple. They were excited about the family that they were going to create before they got married, and they both agreed on um, having 6 children. However, uh, there were complications and health risks that posed a threat with each child that the woman had. They have 3 now, but she was advised medically to not, have any future children because of the medical risks to her and the child. And of course, the husband agreed. Definitely does not want to put his wife in danger or anything like that. However, he, you know, cannot let go of wanting to leave more of a legacy in this life. So he presents to her, can he basically be a sperm donor, to be able to create more life. He doesn't want to step out on her. He just wants to stay committed to her in a relationship. And that would provide him to know that he has more children and more legacy here. And he does pose to her that he would like to be a type of sperm donor that when the children come of age, at least 10 of them, they can connect with him. Um, and I was telling them before you came in that when those types of banks don't usually, there's not, I guess, this law, right, that is just this umbrella for those type of sperm donation banks, right, meaning like each organization can probably set their own cap, like maybe one organization says only 10 families, right, per whatever donation that the man gives. But for some, it's not. It could be 20, it could be 40. And I was telling them, I came across when I decided to present this scenario to you guys, this article that said in the Netherlands that a man allegedly, because I didn't even look all the way into it, allegedly fathered 500 children. My goodness. Wow. You know what I mean? Like when when I read that, I thought about King Solomon in the Bible because it talks about how many wives and how many concubines and so on that he had. But that is just like, whoa. So when you came in, I basically am asking everyone their thoughts. The wife is on the fence, right? Because even though she completely agrees, like he's a wonderful husband, he's a incredible father, and if she could, she would, choose to have more children and put his type of essence and character in the world through them. Uh, but she can't get out of thinking like, okay, how is this going to affect our family? Me knowing that you're here fathering our children, but then there are, I don't know how many children out there in the world that you are potentially a father of. And then what happens when they come back, and the 10 that you have stated that you've given a window of opportunity to connect with you? How do we reconcile that? How does that changes the dynamics of our family and things like that. So she's on the fence, and he's like, any, I don't see where the harm would be done, because I'm here with you. I will be here fathering our children. None of that will change. And then I can also, you know, be able to have multiply my legacy here. So that's the scenario. Let me know what your thoughts are. I know it's a an interesting, messy one tonight. But that's along the lines of the things that we've been talking about lately, right? With Ebony K. Williams going to single motherhood, her amongst other women who are choosing. And so I was like, okay, this is, we can probably do we can probably do something like this. So that's the scenario. Let me know where you guys land. Are you with the husband? No harm, no foul. I'm here. I'm committed with you. I get to be a good Samaritan. I get to multiply my legacy. There are people who are going around unconsciously procreating, with people with bad character, with bad nature, and they are just pouring themselves out into the world, and maybe people like this is him, maybe the people who are like me, who are good natured, good hearted, that would, prayerfully, genetics working in the right way, create people who, right, who would be more, I guess, more leaning towards having that type of good natured character. We need more of us in the world. So this is a way that I can do it and not step out on my marriage. And this doesn't take away from how much I love you, how much I'm committed to you, and fathering our children to the best of our ability. I don't know. Do you agree with him, or do you are like, no, definitely the wife is absolutely right. It's crazy. It will be messy. There's no way to avoid it. Which side do you take? Which side do you Emily said, well, 500 children is a lot, right? Seriously, a lot. A lot, right? For absolutely. And for some of the men on here, I would love, because I tried to think of flipping this scenario on its head, and I wanted to know how many men on here, if the shoe was on the other foot, right? And of course, as a woman, oh my goodness, that's a whole nother thing, right? But there are women who step into who become surrogate mothers, right? Who will, are angels really, and hold to term children for women, or families who can. So I'm curious for the men on here, if it was the the shoe was on the other foot in that way, right? Would you be okay with, one, maybe even just marrying or being in a space with someone who feels like, I think I've never, and I would love to. If anybody is a surrogate mother out there that's listening to the podcast, please contact me, because I would love to have an interview with you, just to ask you so many different questions, because in my heart, in my mind, in my thinking around it, is that I think you would have to be an individual who feels like they're very strongly called to do that. But that's just my thinking. But if it was the shoe on the other foot, and would you be okay, right, with having a wife, a woman who feels like maybe that's her calling, and that's right? And I guess it's a little different, because with him being a sperm donor, he is the father of those children, right? That whatever the woman that he impregnates, he's a father. With surrogacy, right, that could be different. She could be holding literally someone else's, and they just implant it inside her. So that's different in that way. But there are also, right, scenarios where, it's sometimes the eggs that the woman has is not viable at all, and so you will have a surrogate who has, the sperm from maybe the husband, and that sperm will meet her egg, and she'll carry the child, and in that way she would be definitely the mother, right? So yeah, there's a lot of different dynamics here, but I'm curious to hear from the men if they would be okay with that. Because it's kind of similar to the somewhat a lot more complex, right? That goes into it when a woman gets impregnated. But as far as the principle wise, right? And being able to be understanding in that way, it takes a lot on both ends. So that's what we're talking about tonight, folks. Let me know what your thoughts are. And this is a world, right, that people are navigating. There are many of us that are fortunate where when you get married, you choose to have a child or children, that there's no complications, right? It's just like you didn't have to try. God's blessing and his favor just allowed you to be able to get pregnant. And but then there are other people that's not their process, right? And so these things are put in place to be supportive aids, right? Of course, we the hand on the clock, right? The pendulum can swing all the way to the left or to the right, and maybe go to extreme measures, and where things can get really really selfish, kind of like what we were talking about, the Evan K. Williams, where you're just intentionally kind of going into single motherhood, and it wasn't necessarily because you there was all these maybe medical complications and things like that. You're just intentionally saying, I'm just going to look at this thing in one way and one perspective. And so then, therefore, right, the child is going to kind of have to face the repercussions of that. So I don't ever want to shy away from the area just because it's something that I didn't necessarily have to go through in my process, and understand that there are people who do have to, kind of use those routes to be able to conceive. So Emily says, see, if you want to continue your biological legacy and are willing to deal with the consequences, sure. If you want to continue a more spiritual or more moral legacy, maybe adopt a child or two. See, this is why I love Emily, and I always tell you guys, she's so mature. And, like, it's pretty simply said what she said, right? She's able to kind of like put it through, put the line in the sand, right? Because at the end of the day, right, what she's saying is true. It's like, okay, yeah, if you want to continue your legacy and, willing to deal with the consequences or repercussions that come along with making that decision, um, sure, go ahead. But if you want it to be more of a spiritual and a moral legacy, maybe adopt a child or two. And I love that because, as I introduce these um, scenarios, we get to be the coach, right? We get to be the therapist. It's not our situation, we're far from it. So it's great way of being able to kind of extract certain principles and dissect it and kind of see, as I like to say, extract all the selfishness out of it. That's really what we're doing, right? And I always say to you guys, selfishness just means to look at something from only a small perspective or one angle, or not include or look at something holistically, and get out, like they say, bird's eye view, or from God's perspective, and include everything. And I love her answer, because with that second statement that she said, it's like, okay, you can still continue your legacy and be a father, maybe not a biological one, but you can still continue your legacy and be a father to someone and adopt, a child or two. And that way, there's no repercussions as far as the child coming back at some point in your life and saying, this is what I went through because you weren't here. Right. So I love it. Very lovely answer. Very wise, laced with wisdom answer, Emily, in coming in and stating that. And I would have to agree with her. Um, because it's going back to, right, the first quotes that I presented to you guys tonight on fatherhood. All of that is put into the answer that Emily gave us, where we talk about the power of a dad in a child's life is unmatched, where it talks about there is no greater need, you right, in childhood as strong as the need for a father's protection. That's the part that is hard to get away from. And just speaking for someone who, by experience, definitely grew up without my father, and, unfortunately, people in my, biological uncles and things like that not being present when I was a child. It is this feeling, and for me, I guess it was double fold because my mom couldn't take care of me for a good portion of the time. So when people see that, especially people who are predatory, it's almost like you're out to the wolves, right? It's like there's nobody there to protect that child. So I can easily come in, and attack that child, try to influence, try to persuade, try to manipulate, because there's nothing there, right, to counter act. And I will definitely tell you that's how I definitely felt at a certain point in my life until my grandmother stepped in. Thank God for her beautiful soul, to put me in a better positioning. But I most definitely felt like that. Definitely felt like that through the younger ages. And you can kind of sense it when, even as a little child, you can kind of sense a person feeling like you were easy, right? You were easy to be able to um, really just do wrong to, because there was no one there in position to protect you. There was no one in there to guide you. And so, going back to the example that I gave you about the elderly man who was at my church, who would literally give my sister and I rides to our church, even though we could walk there within like a 3 to 5 minute walk. He would drive us every Sunday because he knew, he understood that it only takes a moment, right? A moment of not being fully looked after or fully parented. It only takes a moment for someone to step in um, and try to do harm to a child. And so, again, I appreciated him and his foresight and his wisdom, beyond what I could ever have thought of, and his due diligence of doing something that he felt could protect us. I would have to agree with Emily on this. And I think I would, as I was thinking about this, it was like part of me was like, maybe that's no harm. He could just do that and have his legacy. I get it. He still wants to stay with his wife. Maybe it's not harmful, but that's just one angle, right? Or two angles where he feels like, okay, I'm still going to be faithful to my wife. I'm still going to do what I need to do to father my children. But then it's like, what happens to those other children? What happens to those other children? And I get it. There's no guarantee for all of us to have this ideal situation, you know? But I think there's a difference from like making decisions that are going to cause extra suffering and unnecessary, right? Pain and heartache either to yourself or another individual, versus if you were trying to do something, you were really aiming to do your best, but your best still could not avoid going through or learning, this lesson or going through this process to come out better. That's a different thing. And I think with him intentionally going in and doing it, who knows what's going to happen, because who knows what it, God forbid, if whoever the woman he does impregnate, what if something happens to her? I've experienced and heard people who have, grown up in the system, right? Meaning like their parents aren't there. And so, adopting a child is great, when you are going to people who are well, who are mentally sound, who are emotionally put together. And so they're angels and being good Samaritans and showing the child goodness and taking that child in as their own. That's an ideal scenario. But there are so many people who you speak to who have grown up in the system and that has not been their experience, right? There are people who are just adopting them and they're broken. And you cannot probably bear some of the unimaginable stories that they would tell you about their experiences here. And so, or there in that process and in that system. So that's how important, a father's presence is in a child's life. So I think I'm wholeheartedly agree with Emily on this one. I think that would be the decision that could incorporate his longing, for wanting to multiply his legacy. Of course, it wouldn't be, those children would not have his biological makeup. No way of getting around that. However, I can tell you that I am an example of people and men who have been in my life, who were father figures to me that impacted my life so much that the principles that they live by are now, right, principles that I used to guide my life by. So a part of their makeup is reflected through me, even though, right, we're not blood. Yeah, my blood is not, their blood is not flowing through my veins, right? We're not biologically tied, but the impression and the influence and the positive impact that they've made on my life might as well, right, be a biological father to me, because they impacted me that greatly. So I think when you can look beyond it, and I think that also helps, because we've been talking about these topics that are kind of interconnected and intertwined. I think in the one answer that she put out there, that that's a solution that really um, dismantles the ego and dismantles selfishness to where it can be really, what's the word I'm looking for, inclusive in the way that someone can approach motherhood or fatherhood, if you're somebody who has either had difficulties or someone who is at a certain stage in life and not finding that there is someone who you can see yourself um, being a parent with, and growing together in life, and experiencing all those joys and transformative moments that parenting does offer us. And not everybody's going to want to do that, right? Because there's deep yearning, for many people who are dealing with those things, and who want to feel like this person, this is my blood, this is flesh of my flesh, right? That I'm looking at. And so I understand that. But there's no way to deny that, the answer that she presented pretty much makes it really clear, like there's a way that you can go about this, that it can still be morally and spiritually upstanding, and you can still pour out your legacy into future children, and I think when solutions come like that and they are entrenched with the truth, then us as people and as humans can either just decide to say, okay, wow, there's no way to deny that. That solution kind of covers all corners, It's just a matter of, do I want to concede to that? Do I want to do that? Or do I want to just go with this way because this is the way that I best see fit for that need to be met, And a lot of the times, I think the biggest lesson we can kind of take from all these three consecutive podcasts that are kind of interconnected is that's the difference, right? Between you making a choice driven by your own strength or your own selfish will versus you making a decision that is really backed by, God's truth, universal truth, or soundness when it comes to something. And I think in life, we have many opportunities where the truth is presented to us, and whether we desire to take it in or not, or we'll just decide to do it in the way that we construct in ourselves, that it's the best way to do it. And whenever you, at least I know through experience, whenever I've taken the other road, other than being truthful wholeheartedly to myself and to the others that would be involved in my decision making or my process, I have always incurred like unnecessary pain and heartache. I've always added on to it when I wanted to do it with my own strength and my own will, instead of really submitting wholeheartedly to the truth.